Hello, my name is Cody Canyon of Canyon Music Production House here in Las Vegas, and welcome back to my orchestral tutorial series. So today I'm going to be talking about layering brass. Now, obviously there are many brass libraries that exist by many different companies, each one leaning more towards a certain type of production. There's big epic libraries out there, and some libraries are more finessed, smaller, different size libraries as well, from symphonic to studio size to quartet and even solo. And I'm going to be talking about two libraries that I currently use, which are the Spitfire libraries. To start off, the first library that I am using is the Spitfire Studio Professional Library. And this is a mid-size library. The other library that I'm pairing with is the Abbey Road 1 library. And this is an orchestral library that has the high and low patches for each orchestral section. The only other library I'm using is the Albion 3 Iceni library. I would like to state that I am not in affiliation with Spitfire Audio. This is not an advertisement for them. These are simply the libraries that I have bought because I like them. Now, all of these Spitfire libraries are, in my opinion, very expertly recorded. The attention to detail is next to none, in my opinion. However, one complaint that I do have with the professional studio library is that there's not much body to the sound. There's a lot of detail in the higher frequencies of the Spitfire Studio Professional Brass Library, but I tend to need to pair it with the Abbey Road 1 library to make it fuller, more three-dimensional, and a little bit more epic. So before I show you this piece of music that I made for this tutorial, I would like to be transparent. I did route all of these individual tracks to a brass bus where I have two plugins. I have an EQ where I took out some of the 2K range and some of the low mids around the 300 to 400 range. Those frequencies were building up and I didn't really like them. And the only other thing I did was add a little bit of saturation. On the master bus, I do have a limiter, but nothing is limiting. It's only used for volume. All right, let's take a listen. All right, let's dig in. We're going to start at the top with the trumpets. What I have here is I'm using Spitfire Studio's Professional Brass library, and I have their patches called Trumpets A2 long. And what I've done here is you see all these mic positions. So for this patch here, I've used their tree mic 1 and the outrigger. So a typical tree mic is where the conductor's sitting. So that's just an all-around good sound to capture the essence of the trumpet. And then the outrigger is to kind of add some width to the sound. So I want that standard sound with the width of it. And then I've actually layered in another two trumpets here. And when you do this in Contact, you're going to have to go to the MIDI channel here and go to port A and then push port 1. And that's going to link it to the same MIDI channel. So that's how you can layer and stack sounds in Contact. And then with these mics, I'm using the close mic 1 and the ambient mic. So to capture a little bit of the close definition and then really the room ambient mic position. So I'm layering these two sounds because if I were to use the same mics, I would probably get a little bit of phasing, and it really wouldn't make the sound any bigger. It's just going to kind of interfere with itself. So it's important that when you are stacking sounds, they're coming from different libraries or different mic positions so that phasing doesn't occur. And this way you're actually capturing two more separate trumpets, the sound of those two trumpets at least. So let's take a listen to what this patch alone sounds like. So that sounds really good. This library, it really focuses on that high sting of the trumpet, which is really great for poking through the orchestral mix. It doesn't really have a lot of body, though, which is one of the problems that I have with that patch alone, without pairing it. So what I've done here is I've brought in the Abbey Road 1 trumpet patch, and I've put reverb on it here. And I'm using their long articulation, and the mic I'm using is the Vintage 2. So I wanted these to kind of sit back in a scoring stage sound to kind of support the trumpets, the other library, because those ones are really stinging and in your face, but I want to add some body and depth to the sound, so I'm using this different mic position here. And this is what this sounds like. So you can hear that sound is massively different from the first library patch that I used. And in tandem, they really make a nice full trumpet sound. So those two libraries together, they really captured that full, well-rounded body for a trumpet section that I was after for this piece of music. All right, as we move on to the horns, I'm going to start with my Spitfire Studio Horns library patch. And what I've done here is I've done essentially the same thing that I did with the trumpets. I have two patches of the horns, 4 horns each. I have the close and tree mic active on the first patch, and on the second patch I have the ambient and outrigger. I just typically pair 2 mics each. I listen to each one and see what it brings me, and I just create a sound that I like to get that full, rich sound. Now, with these horns as well as the trumpets, they're a bit stingy and really good to cut through the mix. I'll show you these horns right now. So as you can hear, this patch is excellent with the high end of that horn. It can you really hear that grit in the high end of this patch. And I think it's a wonderful sound, really expertly recorded. However, again, in the more fuller context of things, it's still a bit thin. It doesn't really have a lot of body that I'm wanting for it. So what I've done is I've also loaded the Abbey Road 1 horns patch. And because these horns are taking the kind of the lead melody, and I'm using the Mix 1 mic position for this because it brings a focus to the sound. It really makes the sound stand out instead of laying it back into a more traditional setting. And I like this for when I want my horn line to be accentuated. I really love this horn patch, but I do have to say that as a standalone, in a greater context, at least in a bigger production, it does fall a little bit flat in my opinion. So that's why I like to pair the two patches together, because they kind of really complete each other in a sense, in larger productions. In smaller, more intimate productions, with less going on, these two can potentially stand alone. But let's take a listen to them together now. I think it's quite amazing how these two horn libraries complement each other so well, with the Abbey Road 1 library bringing that three-dimensional depth, that symphonic richness to the sound, while the Spitfire studio horns really add that crystal clear detail on the higher frequencies. So that being said, let us now move on to the lower brass. All right, let's start with my tenor trombones. So I'm using just two of these tenor trombones. I'm using the tree mic and the outrigger. I'm kind of using these tenor trombones to mirror the horn line. I like the grit of the tenor trombones, and it's kind of a different sound than the horns, but they really complement each other really well. It adds a nice bite to the horns because the horns are really well-rounded. But this will come in kind of on the sides of the mix and just really accentuate what the horns are doing. So let's take a listen to this. So essentially, I'm just using this as another layer to go pairing with the horns. Moving down, I have my two bass trombones, and I'm only using one patch for these as well. I'm using the close mic, the tree, and the outrigger. I really wanted that bass trombone growl, so that's why I'm using the close mic, just to kind of put it really close to the ear to kind of capture that definition of the low end of the brass. So we'll take a listen to this. Man, yeah, that growl is so beautiful. But again, same complaint with the other studio horns is that there's not much warmth and body to that sound. They've really done a great job at capturing like the essence of the sound, but I'm just missing the fullness. So I paired it with the low brass patch from the Abbey Road 1 library. So I have its own reverb on that, and I'm using the Vintage 2 mic for this one as well, just to kind of put it in a room now, in a scoring stage setting. So now I have the detail from the two bass trombones, and then the richness and fullness of the Abbey Road 1 library, that low brass patch there. So let's take a listen to this one. So that's so much warmer and fuller. You're hearing the bass, frequencies in that one. And then just to kind of beef it up a little bit more, I paired it with the Albion 3 Brutish Brass Ensemble. Just take a listen. This one has a little bit of the best of both worlds, just with a different tone. It has those sub-bass frequencies in it slightly, but it also has that sting at the top end. So with that being stated, let's listen to all three of these combined and see what we get. So we're really starting to get an epic sound out of this with all these three layers. The only thing that I thought was missing was to have a strong present sub frequency layered in. So all I did was load a pure sine wave and layered that in. So let's take a listen to how that sounds. So there you have it. That's the low end for the brass section. These four libraries combined, these four patches combined, gave me that full, well-rounded, kind of earth-shattering epicness that I was wanting from my low brass, with keeping that detail of the instrument, with on the higher end, so that we could actually hear a tone instead of just being swimming in the mud of the low frequencies. So now let's take a listen to how everything sounds. I'm going to start muting a few of these tracks. I want us to take a listen to the first layer here. So we're going to mute all the Abbey Road 1 libraries so we can just hear that first layer and see what kind of difference there is between just that first layer and all of the layers combined. We're going to get rid of this sine wave as well. So yeah, let's take a listen. Now let's bring in the full production again so you can hear the true difference. So the last thing I want to talk about is what I've done with the reverb. So I typically like to stack reverbs depending on the production, just to kind of give a more 3D effect to the sound. So what I've done is I have two reverbs, two hall reverbs. So the first reverb I have is this Concert Hall Vienna preset from the FabFilter Pro R. Done a little bit of an EQ cut at the bottom just to get it out of the way of the true frequencies coming in from the samples themselves. We don't need the reverb getting in those low ends, muddying up the mix. And then for the second reverb, I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb, just their concert hall, the 1970s color, and right around 600 hertz, and around 6,000 for the high cut, at a 4-second decay. And you can play with this to kind of, if you want a larger room sound, you can play with it. And I have most of them going to both. The Abbey Road library, I only have one. I have it going to the Hall Verb 2, the Valhalla Vintage Verb, because I'm also using the reverb that comes with the patch itself. So I just like layering the reverbs for different sounds, different rooms, and it creates a really nice, rich effect. So that's what I do for the reverbs. I hope that this technique can help you in your own compositions. This technique works with many different libraries. So just play with it, experiment with it, and see what you can do with these sounds that you have. And if I brought some value to you today, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.